Hello and welcome to episode 4 of 7 Skills for the Future podcast series. I'm Emma Sue Prince and I'm joined by my producer James.
Hi Emma Sue and hello everybody.
So today I'm going to continue with my introduction to one of the 7 skills. So in the last 2 episodes I talked about adaptability and critical thinking. There are 7 skills altogether. So they include adaptability, critical thinking, empathy, integrity, optimism, being proactive and resilience. So these introductory podcasts are to look at the skill in a bit more detail, looking a bit more what it is, why we need it, and some easy ways that you can start developing it. And today's skill is empathy.
So can you give us a quick definition of what exactly empathy is?
Yes. So empathy is the ability to understand and be aware of, to kind of co-experience, if you like, the feelings and thoughts of other people. So it's probably one of the most important skills you can cultivate, but it's actually quite challenging as well, because you have to step out of your own little bubble to actually use it as a skill. And so this means you've got to put your own stuff aside and choose to see the situation through the other person's eyes. It's about being non-judgmental. So, we like to judge other people's situations quite quickly, but if we're using empathy, then we need to put that to one side. And it's about understanding what somebody else is really feeling. And that can be hard because sometimes we don't want to step into their pain, if you like. So a good example is my younger son has just started a new school and he's finding it quite difficult to adapt to sort of longer days and different things that he's doing. And he gets really upset at the moment. He gets really upset and he's in tears and we have these sort of, it's horrible. It's horrible as a mum. And I find myself wanting to say to him, yeah, but it's going to be half term soon and don't worry about that. Think about this, rather than just being with him in the moment of his pain. So sometimes it's difficult because we just don't want to be with that pain. And so we'll try and say things like, well, at least you could be, at least this is happening, or it could be worse. But actually with empathy, it's just about being with somebody in that moment with whatever they're feeling. So it's really important. And I want to talk a bit about why I think it's a must-have skill, why we really need to have it. So skills that are uniquely human. So things like active listening and caring and nurturing, these are really important for now and for the future, because you can't outsource these things. You can't automate them, and they're still going to be important for whatever job that you have. Empathy is also crucial for our own interpersonal relationships, for our life satisfaction, and just being able to respond well to challenges that are going on around us. So it's really important both personally and in the workplace as well. So if you haven't got empathy, you're never going to have good listening skills or the ability to really value your relationships and be there for someone. And I think this is more important now than ever because everything we do is very visible to a much bigger audience. So because of the amount we interact online and just how we communicate and relate to others, I think empathy is becoming more important. It's also often referred to as social intelligence. And social intelligence is the ability to really quickly assess the emotions of people around you and adapt your words and your tone and your gestures accordingly. So it's a bit like a superpower, I think. It's more important now because we are collaborating with bigger groups of people. We're interacting with more people in different kinds of settings, both online, offline. So yeah, I think it's probably one of the most important tools that you can have in your skill set.
Which areas of empathy are we going to talk about today?
So empathy is a big area. There's lots of research around it. There's lots of articles and background around what it is. I want to talk about 3 aspects of empathy today, which I think really help us. I'm going to talk about listening skills, the role of mindfulness, and self-care. So all of these 3 things are really helpful for empathy. So first of all, listening. Now, the gift of attention, this is humanity's strongest need, is to be listened to be validated. And it's hard for us to do because actually we don't really think or perceive the world as other people do. We see it, we operate in our own way of thinking and our own way of seeing or perceiving the world. And we kind of expect everyone else to be also operating from that little bubble. And we might assume that they do, and we might sort of think people can read our minds and can feel what we're feeling or see what we're seeing. But actually, that's not the case at all. And being able to use empathy consistently requires a lot of work, a conscious degree of attention and real effort. And a key aspect of that is actively listening. And it's something we find really difficult to do. But the first step towards really listening and giving the gift of attention is to be 100% present and be in the moment and to put your ego aside.
Okay, Emma Sue, that sounds great in theory, okay? But sometimes in practice, there are people who annoy you or frustrate you and you just don't like them. You know, how can we use empathy in that situation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I think using empathy in that situation can definitely help you have a more balanced approach to working with that person or working with difficult people in general, just dealing with difficult people. And of course, listening is a big aspect of that. But I think there are some things you can do. First of all, it's important to acknowledge that people aren't necessarily deliberately irritating you or annoying you. They're probably reacting to things that are going on in their own lives. So, you know, how other people do that will depend on their own self-awareness and their ability to stand back and not project issues onto you. So I think it's important to acknowledge that as well, but also to think about yourself and think, well, why, you know, what's causing me to react in that way? What is it about this person that actually annoys me or frustrates me? So there is that degree of understanding yourself, which is important for empathy, because if you don't understand yourself, you're not going to be in a good position to understand others. Yeah. So your own self-awareness is really important here. It's also important to stay calm. So you don't want to get into a situation where you're already upset with that person, because that's going to be very difficult to handle. So recognize clues that you might be getting triggered. Just things like breath might speed up. If somebody's annoying you, you might start to sort of feel some quite physical things around that person. And this is important to understand because it's basically part of your brain which is responding. And it's, if you think of it a little bit as you losing access to the rational part of your brain. And that might mean that you start to engage in behavior that's not very positive. So taking a few deep breaths can help to regulate those hormones, because it is hormones that are kicking in there, and helps you to be calmer so you can use empathy. So being calm puts you in a better state of mind to practice empathy for the other person, because you're not caving, you're not shutting down, you're staying cool and collected, and you're aware of the situation. So another thing that you can try is being curious and just maybe generating some theories why a person says what they say, or why they think the way they do, or why they act the way they do. And try to focus on your similarities. Try focusing on the things that you might have in common with that person. And I think just be kind. So when you dislike someone, it's very easy to assume the worst about that person. And if you do, or when you do, then that mindset will show up in your behavior, so that you're actually not very nice to them. So I always think, practice as much kindness as you can, even more than you normally would with someone that you perhaps don't like. And
our listeners, of course, are getting perfect opportunity to empathise at the moment because of your dog there in the background. And what's his name? His name's Oscar. He's a lovely golden retriever. I'm sure our listeners will empathise with how whatever Oscar is feeling at the moment. Okay, so let's move on to talk about the next one, which is the role of mindfulness. Yes, so this is one of the key steps in being able to really listen, and you need to be present and you need to put your own stuff aside. So in some ways, maybe when we talk about mindfulness, because that's another big area, perhaps it's better to talk about mindlessness, because mindlessness is a lot of automatic habitual thought. And your brain does this because your brain's wanting to be effective and efficient and treats information as if it's true, regardless of circumstances. So mindlessness happens most often when you're distracted, when you're hurried, when you're multitasking, or when you're feeling overloaded. And since some of us perhaps do some of those things a lot of the time, or definitely some of the time, we need to attack that. It's much more challenging to tap into empathy when you feel distracted or overwhelmed. It's almost impossible. So mindfulness helps you to immediately become more present and focused. And both of these are really important for great listening. And it also encourages a more reflective way of interacting with other people and responding to other people. And research shows that when you practice mindfulness, it actually even fires up the same neurons in your brain that are already hardwired for empathy.
So mindfulness is important, big topic, something we'll come back to in other podcasts, but really helpful for empathy. And the third aspect is self-care. And that's really starting with yourself. So if empathy is about understanding others and showing understanding and compassion and kindness to others, you've got to be able to do that with yourself first. So it's a bit like when they tell you on a plane to put your oxygen mask on before you help your child with theirs. Yeah. It's like that. So unless we're able to look after ourselves, we're never going to have the energy and the resources or effort that's required when it comes to other people. We're just not going to have it. So look after yourself first. That will also increase your own self-awareness. Also very important for dealing with people who might be annoying or frustrating. So this is about paying attention to whether you're getting what you need just on a day-to-day level. And that's physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. What do you need? We have a very helpful download on the website about self-care, which you can access. And it'll help you to think about what contributes to how you feel, things that make you feel good, things that help you feel grounded. And it's important as well because our levels of empathy aren't necessarily fixed for all situations and across our lives. So we may be empathetic in one situation, but then that can fluctuate and change. So it's compromised if you're under stress or tired or just not looking after yourself.
I see. Yeah. Whereabouts on the website can our listeners find that download?
If you go to the Unimenta website and go to the 7 skills and look under empathy, it will be there.
You've convinced me. I can see that this is a very important skill. So have you got any suggestions that will help me to develop my own empathy skills?
Yes, I have, James. And I want you to try them out as soon as you can, as well as our listeners to try them out as soon as you can. So as I talked about the role of listening, so I'm going to come back to that. So just some quick ways to use listening skills is, ask a great question or two in every interaction you have. Think of a question to ask and related to what the other person has just been saying to you. Things like putting away any distractions, putting your phone away whilst you're talking to somebody else, listening with intent, and just things like orienting your body and eyes towards the other person, because that will convey interest and that will convey engagement. Mm-hmm. And before a meeting or before a conversation even that you're going to have, just take a moment to think about the person you'll be with and what may be happening in their lives. To actually just take that, a couple of moments to think about that. So that's listening. Another is to practice gratitude. Now, practicing gratitude is linked to other skills as well, like optimism and happiness levels, but you can use it to help you develop empathy. So things like saying thank you, and thank you can be a verbal thank you, or it can be a thoughtful thank you, sending a card, or, something that's a bit more tangible, perhaps sending notes of appreciation for jobs done well, or if you appreciate someone in your life, telling them that. Often the people closest to us, we don't tell them enough how much we appreciate them or love them. So doing that more will just raise your awareness of your own ability to have empathy. And another great way to use empathy is to just give people credit and acknowledge the value that somebody gives to your work or to something that you're working on at the moment or what you're doing. Like, I'm very grateful to you, James, for helping me with learning how to do podcasts, because I'm still learning. So I'm really grateful to have that.
You're welcome. And thank you for this excellent advice. See, I'm started already.
Yes, exactly. So just saying thank you more will immediately get you just thinking about empathy. And there's one last thing you can do as well, which is to practice generosity. So generosity is things like your time. So spend a bit more time with people that you're leading or working with or who are close to you. Think about how you can give them time. Another really nice thing to do is to give more responsibility to people. So again, this can be people that you work with, but it can also be family. It can be children as well, to give them something that's a little bit that they can probably do, but a little bit above, not above their skills level, but just something that will raise their responsibility level is great. Praising people and just sharing the limelight with anyone who's in your life. So generosity and being kind. Again, things that you can do straight away that will help you with your empathy skills.
I've become interested in this a lot recently, especially the listening one. And I find that often in conversations, especially as I've become more mindful of this, I've noticed that often in conversations, people are not really actually having a conversation, but it's more about how they want to get across their message. And then while the other person is speaking, it's a time for them to sort of formulate what they're going to say next. So it's not actually like a proper conversation of like, which would be like a game of table tennis. But rather it's just like two people hitting their own ball. And I wonder, you know, how common do you think that is?
Yes, this is very common. We do it all the time. I do it, you do it, our listeners do it. It's the most natural thing in the world because we just want to get in there and say what we're thinking. And I think I said earlier on that it's a gift to give people your attention and to really listen is something that we crave. So when you do it, it has a big impact. So I always say to try and practice these kinds of skills in what I call low stakes situations. So practice listening with the people closest to you, because that's also when you probably, don't listen as well as you could do. And then when you need to be, when you're in a high stakes situation, like an interview or a really important conversation that you've got to have with a loved one, you're going to be much better at empathy and at listening. So I think, we just have to acknowledge that, yes, we do that, but we can also make an effort and listen well. And it's just learning to do that and learning when it's important to do that, when it's really important to use that skill.
Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of today's episode.
Yes, we have. And the 7 Skills for the Future podcast will continue to introduce the skills. And then we'll start to look at some of the deeper aspects of them. So exploring how we can really apply them more and more. Tools like mindfulness and listening are big areas. They're big topics. We've just touched on them a little bit today. But I want to go into those in more detail, explore things like improvisation, how things like, for example, a great morning routine can really help you with some of these skills. And I've also got some great interviews coming up with field experts from happiness, from positive psychology, from education, and they'll be talking about their stance on these skills and how they use them and why they're important. So thank you very much for listening and looking forward to seeing you on the next podcast.